Hello, this is Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week we find ourselves in lectionary week 11 and in year A, and our Old Testament reading is 1 Kings 19, 9 through 18. And as maybe you can tell from the picture here, this is Elijah on the top of Mount Carmel before all the gods and prophets of Baal, and he is showing the mightiness of our God. So let's take a look at a little bit of background. Elijah has been prophet for a while, and he's had a big job because King Ahab is really disobeying whatever Elijah is suggesting, because they are choosing to worship Queen Jezebel's gods, and that would be Baal. And this drought that has occurred was because of their worshiping of Baal. So Elijah just has one of his biggest moments in his ministry as a prophet, and God shows up big, and God does an amazing thing by starting fire within water, and people are amazed, and many prophets of Baal have now died. He has taken on these gods of Queen Jezebel and won, and boy, is Queen Jezebel angry and has threatened him for his life. I would recommend going back and reading 1 Kings chapter 18, as it's just a great chapter of seeing how God shows up at a huge moment and reveals himself that he is God of all. So if we take a look at maybe our own spiritual lives and what's going on with Elijah has a huge spiritual moment, a mountain high, an encounter, a theophany with God, only to end up in the valley very quickly, only to end up in fear. And maybe some of us have had like a weekend retreat where it's just been this amazing high, and you come back and all of a sudden you receive news or something happens and you're like very quickly back down in that valley. So let's read 1 Kings 19, 9 through 18. At that place where he came to a cave and spent the night there, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is ready to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life, to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and you shall anoint Elijah, son of Shaphat, of Abel Maloah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill, and whoever escapes the word or the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." So God asks a really interesting question to Elijah. He asks, "What are you doing here?" Once Elijah reached Mount Horeb, Elijah came to the cave where he spent the night, continuing with the Moses parallels. This was not just any cave, but the same cave where Moses experienced God's theophany. Remember now that Elijah traveled for 40 days and 40 nights, which also kind of comes out of the Moses parallels as well. The author lends legitimacy to Elijah's office of prophet by establishing him as a prophet like Moses, whom God promised at Mount Horeb to raise from among the people. At this time, the people feared God's theophany at Sinai, lest they die, and asked Moses to speak for them. Elijah has an experience like Moses' encounter with God in the cleft in the rock at Sinai. Elijah has a threefold response to God's question, and the text suggests that God came to Elijah in a dream. First, Elijah responds that he has been very zealous for the Lord. This response comes across as a defensive for having fled to Horeb. The term zealous means to show great energy or enthusiasm for a cause, such as a crusader. Elijah has been campaigning vigorously for God. The cause of his crusade, according to Elijah, is that the Israelites have forsaken the covenant, torn down God's altars, and killed God's prophets. Elijah does not mention that he ordered the murder of over 450 prophets of Baal and Asherah as part of his campaign. Still, the people turned back to God after the events at Mount Carmel. So perhaps he is mischaracterizing the people's fidelity. Perhaps Elijah's recollection of events is a little hazy. And the question arises, is he really alone? In Elijah's second response, he alone is left of God's prophets. Elijah's report that no other prophets survived Jezebel's slaughter of God's prophets conflicts with the report he received from Obadiah, a palace steward and follower of God, that he had hidden 100 prophets and provided them with food and drink. Perhaps in Elijah's despair, he could not recall this detail either. And Elijah's third and final response is that his life is in danger. Fear keeps Elijah sheltered. God commanded Elijah to come out of the cave and stand on the mountain before God where God would pass by. However, Elijah refused and sheltered in the safety of the cave while God's theophanic presence manifested. First, there's a wind so strong that it causes pieces of the mountain to break away. But the narrator reports that God was not in the wind. This theophanic phenomenon was followed by an earthquake and fire. But God was not in these phenomena either. A sound of sheer silence or a small voice followed, the sound of which drew Elijah from the cave. God asks Elijah again, "What is he doing there?" And Elijah repeats what he said in verse 10. Despite Elijah's continued complaints and fear of Jezebel, God recommissions him to return to the wilderness with assignments to anoint new kings over Aram and Israel and appoint Elisha as his successor. So I'd like us to look at a little theological reflection here, and maybe just, some interesting conversation on, is Elijah fired? Because we look at what Elijah did, and he ran from the situation out of fear. But what if he had trusted God in all of this? It was God who brought down the prophets of Baal. It was God who performed the miracle. What if Elijah had trusted in God enough to know that God would protect him and he didn't need to flee? But we see that Elijah ran from his troubles rather than trusting that God would shelter him from harm. In the end, Elijah had to return to the place he fled and do the work that God called him to do. God's question to Elijah, "What are you doing here?" should prompt us to reflect on whether we are where God would have us be. Are we in a job, relationship, or place where we are emotionally or spiritually far from where God wants us? Or are we flourishing in spaces that nurture and embrace us? What other Old Testament stories that remind you of Elijah's not trusting God? So what other stories from the Old Testament kind of reflect this? And I think we can find a lot of them. Moses hitting the stone twice instead of following God's command, not trusting God, maybe trusting in his own power and not God's power. And God quickly reminded Moses who was in power. I also think this story reminds me a little bit of Jonah, how Jonah ran from God. And Jonah still had to carry out God's orders. God found him. God made Jonah continue to do what God had asked him to do. So Jonah reluctantly, he's kind of the reluctant prophet, goes and does God's work. And here we have Elijah after just an amazing moment of God's presence surrounding him and backing him and showing up in such a big way. One would think that Elijah would have trusted in God a little more instead of fearing Queen Jezebel. Well, I hope you have some time to think about Elijah. I hope you have some time to think about your relationship with God. And are you far from God spiritually? Or are you where God wants you to be and flourishing in spaces that nurture and embrace us? And if you're not, what's keeping you from that? Please know that this week, I hope that you have an opportunity to think about these things. And I hope that as you do, that God blesses you with some answers or maybe a theophany of your own. Stay cool and have a good week.